All right, well, welcome everybody. I think I've met most of you, but if I haven't, I'm Padraig Kenny, the director of Collins LLC. I have to say this is such a proud moment because when I look out and seeing so many alumni and so many students together to celebrate Collins history, it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. My job here is to make things move along, not to give a speech. Before I introduce our first speaker, I do want to offer a few words of thanks. First, I really have to start with President Michael McRobbie and the Board of Trustees for initiating the idea of celebrating IU's bicentennial in so many different ways. I have to say I have been astounded at the variety of ways that IU is celebrating, not only in Bloomington, but on every campus in the IU system, but especially in Bloomington, because this is where it all started. Really warm thanks to the President and to the Board of Trustees. Second, I want to thank the Bicentennial Office and the Bicentennial Committee. I'll have a bit more to say about that in just a moment when I introduce a member of that committee. But the work that committee has done to take so many different kinds of events and ways of commemorating, including especially the historical marker celebration, but of course also the bicentennial medals, which we've just celebrated inside. It's making this year a really, really special one. And, to everyone who's a student right now, I mean, this is quite a year. You're going to remember that you were part of the bicentennial year. Well, that leads me to the students. It was two students in particular who took up the idea of celebrating Collins history as part of the bicentennial. One of them is in London this year. That is our Collins historian from last year, Nicole Strauss. Just an amazing job she did, not by herself, but getting a group of students together to write the proposal for the historical marker and to respond to all of the additional questions for information and then to move that along. And then this year, as you've already heard, this year's Collins historian Aaron Sizemore has taken up the baton. And I forgot to mention it earlier, but I just want to mention that if you just turn, you can't see it super well, but if you just turn around and look at the flagpole, you will see there is a new flag, sort of demurely draped there. That is the new Collins flag. And so when there's a gust of wind, as we hope there will be at some point, remember to turn around and look and check out the flag. It's great. It's great, and it's got a gnome on it. So what more could you want? Finally, before I turn it over, I want to thank the staff, both at Collins and at RPS, both those who work here and those who work up at 801 North Jordan, in 100 little ways, both for this ceremony, but for other steps along the way. They've been ready to step in and do what needed to be done, and I'm just so grateful to them. So I guess for all of those, could you just please a round of applause for the staff and for everyone else. Thank you. All right, our first speaker will be Paul Gutjahr, who is Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education and for the Arts and Humanities in the College of Arts and Sciences.
Padraig's given me 2 minutes, so I'm going to try to keep to that. I'm an English professor by training, and as I've been thinking about this day, this ceremony, and Collins' relationship to the college, one of the things that kind of kept coming back to me is something a literary critic once wrote of the Shakespearean character Falstaff. And I think the gnome invokes kind of a little Falstaff every time I see it. And what this literary critic said is that Falstaff is an interesting character, not so much because who he is, but because of what he does for others. That every scene that Falstaff is in, every character that is in that scene becomes more interesting to us. And in a way, that moment, that literary critical moment, reminds me of Collins. It reminds me of kind of the Falstaffian nature of Collins, that when Collins touches people, when they enter the precincts of Collins, when they come away from Collins, they're a better person. They're more interesting. They're more curious. They're more courageous. They're more creative. And so what I wanted to say today is I think the college just celebrates the Falstaffian nature of Collins, that we are all better because Collins is here. And so, and thanks for the gnome.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sara Ivey Lucas, who is the Interim Director of Resident Life in Residential Programs and Services, and also, as I think many of you know, a proud Collins alumna. Sara.
And so Patrick didn't give me exactly the same timeline that he did. So and then as I talked with Heather about sharing comments with you all today, she got a little bit too excited about some of the stories that I might share. So hopefully I won't go on too long. But I want to thank you all for coming this afternoon to celebrate this place that I consider home. As we start this celebration and take this moment, I would like to acknowledge the indigenous communities that were native to this region and recognize that all of Indiana University Bloomington has been built on their indigenous homelands and with those resources. That recognizes the Miami, the Delaware, the Potawatomi, and the Shawnee people as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. As I think about this being my home, it feels important to me in this bicentennial year that we recognize that piece of our university's history. And as I mentioned, Heather got really excited about stories that I might share, names that I might name. Mind you, it's not my reputation that needs protecting in any of that. It's all of the others who were around at that point in time. But I do think that as I speak from the perspective of residential life and what that means to this community and that cooperation and partnership between Residence Life and the Collins Living Learning Center, the easiest way for me to do that is to speak about it in terms of some of those stories and some of those personal impacts that came to me. And so when I came to Collins and chose to live here as a freshman, I really had no idea what I was getting. I was just getting a residence hall. I knew I wasn't getting Foster that they showed me on the tour, where the sorority girls were all really happy and wanted everybody to be involved in sorority and fraternity life on campus. But I drove on Woodlawn Avenue with my parents and I said, if they'll let me live in this building here, then I'll come to IU, because this is what I like. And sure enough, I got that space, the third floor of Smith. And I landed with a group of women that we have now come to dub ourselves as the out-of-state outcasts when we arrived in Collins. There were 6 of us down by Smith 313, and we didn't know how to play euchre after the first floor meeting. And so we couldn't hang out with the folks from Indiana. We had to learn how to form community ourselves. And so to Megan Ray and Maura Fernbacher and Bernadette Sheridan and Stephanie Everett, they forever will hold that really dear place in my heart for being here with me, teaching me all kinds of things about how to navigate that first year in college. And mostly what I remember is long lunches and dinners. It was back in the days of all-you-could-eat dining, and so we would get here as early as we could, and we would stay as long as we could. And Jim Beeson was my favorite dining hall manager. I see some head nods from folks who got to know Jim. And he was lovely, and thinking about some things that Patrick has talked about recently in terms of self-governance. I remember Bernadette taking the charge, creating a meal plan committee, and what she fought for, surprisingly enough, was SpaghettiOs. And Jim was like, I could do so much better than this. I am a culinary expert. He was experimenting with vegan and vegetarian options for the dining hall menu, and he was like, SpaghettiOs out of a can? But the student's voice spoke, and students got excited about it, and so once a month we had SpaghettiOs. And if you were friends with Bernadette, you didn't not eat the SpaghettiOs. They're like, that was just what you did. So I remember that group and love them. I also wanted to highlight Monty Groves, who was one of my early educational inspirations. He always wore an American flag, always. It might have been as a hat, a bandana, a shirt, once a diaper, but that moment and that having an idea and being willing to put yourself out there and engage everyone in conversation about why that's so important to you. And I appreciate Ernest Bernhardt Kabish and Basu and Carl Ziegler and Chris Kearns and Karl-Heinz Dukestein, all of that group who was here as staff in my initial days, for encouraging that community and making that happen. And at the same time, I want to recognize Mary Lazinski and Richard Blackheader and Joyce Bittner and staff that were here from the residence life and housing side of things that had just as much passion for students, just as much care for the buildings and the community, and they seemed to know how Maslow works, that if you're not taking care of the base, if you're not taking care of all of that, then all of the self-actualization and good ideas will never happen. So it all needed to come together and to play. And so I graduated, and residential programs and services told me that I should move on. They would be happy for me to get a degree in higher education and student affairs and stay here and keep learning, but I should experience new communities. And so I did that, and was completely dumbfounded the day that I was allowed to come back to Collins and be a part of the staff team here. It was a miraculous moment and some very lovely years, and I did just as much learning. And so I had students who taught me that I needed to hold in myself both what I saw of myself as an agitator and an instigator and someone who was going to promote change and make the IU campus a better place, while at the same time being an administrator and having an obligation and a duty to take care of campus. And so for all of those lessons that I didn't want to learn from Jonah Bush, I hold them in place, and I have learned them. And Kristen giggles over here, and Kristen Murphy is one of my other kind of pride and joy from that period of time, and she wrote the text that is on the plaque that we're going to unveil, and just all of the people that were special in that moment. And so one more story for Kristen's benefit, and you all can imagine it behind me, had a student with a penchant for wrestling, loved all of that, and decided to build an 18-foot high tower on the veranda with 8-foot tables so that he could look into the staff room there on the second floor and try to scare Bertie Burns. So Jeremy, too, taught me many, many things about what is possible and what shouldn't be possible in a residential community. And so I started going through old orientation student rosters and staff rosters and all the people that I could name and all those stories that I could tell. This is a very special place, rich with learning, rich with love and community, and just such a special environment that we need to continue to find ways to foster in all of our residential communities across campus. Everyone who comes to Indiana University deserves to have a Falstaffian moment where they become better and they become richer and they can then serve their broader community in a wonderful way. So to the artists and the activists, the doctors and the lawyers and all of the great people that I interacted with here at Collins as an undergrad, as a staff member in the building, and now as the interim director for residential life, I am proud of this community. I love this community and look forward to seeing it exist and prosper for many, many more years. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Now it's a real honor to introduce James Capshew, who is the university historian. So Collins is not the only place that has its own historian. The university does as well. And he is the chair of the Historical Marker Committee. And again, I just want to express my gratitude because he and his team worked so carefully with Collins last year. I know we had a great proposal, but it required so much goodwill and effort on behalf of the university, and particularly the Historical Marker Commission. So please join me in welcoming James Capshew.
So I guess this is your history lesson, guys. In the fall of 1924, the Residence Hall for Men, still unfinished and unnamed, was open to 100 male students. They camped out in the attic and dodged workmen for the several weeks it took to complete the dorm rooms. As the months wore on, the new dormitory had yet to acquire a name. Anxious residents sent a telegram to the IU Board of Trustees in late March, respectfully inquiring about a name for their new home, and suggested some possibilities, including Woodburn Hall, Ballantyne Hall, and Hogate Hall. A few weeks later, the trustees complied and named the new dormitory Washington Hall. Nonplussed, the students were perplexed by the choice. They circulated a petition calling for renaming the building from Washington Hall to South Hall. The petition stated, "With all due reverence to our great American patriot, we honestly believe that were he alive today, he would not approve of having his name used in conjunction with our dormitory, nor with the many other of the various buildings and projects now being named in his memory. Instead, the students preferred to look towards the future at an open quadrangle of 3 buildings in a proposed university court. They were living in the south wing of the planned complex." President William O'Brien responded three weeks later, "In accordance with your petition and upon the recommendation of Dean Edmondson and Miss McDonald, the name of the men's dormitory has been fixed as South Hall." Self-governance had already taken root. The plans for the university court were not realized until 15 years later, however. Under a new IU administration, that of Herman Wells, 2 more buildings were completed in 1940, West Hall and North Hall, and the complex was dubbed the Men's Residence Center. Now the campus had 2 main residential sites, one for women and one for men. The Agnes Wells Quadrangle on 3rd Street, which was anchored by Memorial Hall and included Goodbody, Morrison, and Sycamore Halls. Clear across campus on 10th Street was the Men's Residence Center. Their locations at opposite sides of campus was no accident. Another 2 decades passed until 1959. South, West, and North Halls were renamed, respectively, Ulysses Smith Hall, Clarence Evanson's Hall, and John Craven's Hall. These 3 men, all undergraduate alumni, were administrative stalwarts of the Bryant administration. Cravens had become the IU registrar in 1895. 3 years later, he added the duties of secretary to the Board of Trustees to his administrative portfolio. Craven served both students and trustees in his dual roles for over a third of a century until he retired in 1936. Ulysses Smith started his IU career as an assistant to Registrar Cravens in 1899, moving up to become the University Bursar in 1908. In addition to his administrative role, he taught accounting on a regular basis until his retirement in 1937, the year that President Bryan retired. Edmondson obtains his doctorate in physiology from IU and started teaching courses in hygiene in 1909. He had winning ways with students, and he became Dean of Men in 1919, serving for 25 years until 1944. He was also an expert at billiards, winning the National Faculty Billiards Championship from 1936 to 1944. In 1980, the Living Learning Center was renamed in honor of Ralph Collins, Vice President and Dean of the Faculties. He died at 55 of a heart attack in 1963. On October 25th, 1963, exactly 56 years ago to this day, and actually at this time, 4:30 in the afternoon, President Ellis Stark presided over a memorial service in Wittenberger Auditorium for Dean Collins. Collins was born in tiny Eclectic, Alabama in 1908, the year after the village was incorporated. He obtained his PhD in English from Yale University and started teaching at IU in 1935. During the Second World War, he was headmaster of the recently expanded Men's Residence Center, living with his wife, Dottie, and infant son in an apartment on the premises. He also coached the varsity tennis team from 1940 to 1945. And I noticed there is a picture of him with a tennis player from that period. Ralph's wife, Dottie, became a fixture in the IU administration, first as a speechwriter for President Starr, and then embarking upon a 25-year career as University Chancellor Herman B. Wells Research Associate. When Chancellor Wells was 90, he allowed Dottie to retire at age 80. A few years before the Collins renaming, Chancellor Wells and Dottie Collins paid a visit to the center upon the students' request. He recounted stories of the Men's Residence Center as well as responding to questions. Talking about Ralph Collins, who was an invaluable administrative colleague, Wells revealed a characteristic habit. Collins invariably closed his letters by the single word, "onward," above his signature. This provides an appropriate end to my remarks as I wandered through nearly a century of IU history. With this historical marker, generations of students, alumni, faculty, and visitors will have an occasion to pause and reflect upon the rich past of Collins Living Learning Center as we go into IU's third century. Onward.
Well, what I'm hearing is nearly a century of student activism, protest, and so on, and I devoutly hope that continues. Let me now introduce Audrey Hood, who is a senior majoring in French and a Collins LLC resident, and last year was the chair of the Board of Educational Programming. Audrey.
Hi, everybody. It is my pleasure to serve as the student representative for Collins at today's ceremony, especially given that this is my last year. Thank you all for being here to celebrate, in true Collins fashion, a student-led initiative to commemorate a space that has been well-loved since its beginnings. After several attempts to shove more memories into this speech than time allows, I've concluded that it would be impossible for me to honor the full breadth and weight of this community. I can't speak for each of your experiences, but I believe that I can speak to them with my own. So I propose a simple, non-exhaustive, list of transformative lessons and experiences that have made Collins historic in my mind. Though it lacks in eloquence and fluidity, I think that you will relate to at least some of it, and I hope that it makes you think of what you would put on your own list. First, your neighbors across the hall see you in those in-between moments of the day that don't seem important at the time, but in the long run contribute to a rare understanding of who you are as a person. In times of need, remember that they are there, even if no one else is, even if you don't become friends. I did become friends with mine, and to this day, Ari and Morgan keep me going. Second, community outreach exists on several collective and individual levels at Collins, all of them valuable. The annual Soup Bowl benefit sticks out to me, as well as one student's contribution to a feminist house show to support an inclusive music scene and raise money for Middle Way House. Third, fee committee is totally underrated. It is exceptional that students have the ability to empower their peers so directly. Fourth, to that point, besides choosing the Collins curriculum, one of the most rewarding parts of being on the Board of Educational Programming was providing funding for student initiatives. I think my favorite event that we supported was a cider making social. Fifth, do not lose the conference room key. It is a sacred key and should be treated as such. I am speaking from experience. Sixth, Collins Columns reminds me constantly of the unceasing creativity of this community. It is a highly cathartic alternative to mainstream media consumption. Seventh, it was only through becoming a Q instructor that I became aware of the diversity of student experiences at Collins. I'd like to issue a thank you to my students for their energy, their candidness, and their patience, especially when I couldn't make Canvas work. Eighth, the Collins Archive is worth the visit. In it, the stories of former Collinsites are traceable and legitimized, just as yours are. Shout out to the students who have done great work there in recent years. Ninth, Collins is a wonderful place to fall in love. The courtyard under the stars with hot chocolate from the Chesh is very romantic. Enough said. 10th, I am the first person to forego extracurriculars in order to finish my homework. Fireside chats, town halls, Q projects, and open mic nights remind me that I'm not just here for academics, I'm here for an education. And lastly, Nome really is where the home is. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Let me now invite up IU's newest recipient of a Bicentennial Medal, Tate Holt.
Thank you. I'm going to tell three very quick stories. It's getting chilly, and I gave most of my content earlier, so I won't bore you. There's not a quiz. So I came to Indiana to swim. I arrived for my recruiting visit as a junior. It was about the 1st of August. It was probably 72 degrees, no humidity, not a cloud in the sky. And I went out to the outdoor pool. I met Doc Councilman. I walked to the edge of the pool. He whistled. This guy stopped swimming, and it's a former Olympian, gold medalist. I was done. I mean, that was all I needed. In those days, you could be accepted on a PSAT score. So my senior year was completely anticlimactic. I knew where I was going to go. I arrived here. I should say that January 1st of that year, I went to the Rose Parade for the Rose Bowl, and I watched the Indiana Hoosiers march down Pasadena, and I thought that was normal. So my initial experiences, then I got to MRC, never considered that it would be anything but a men's residence center, because this is where the swimmers were, and we swam there, and that was the way that it was. And along the way, I got an education, and I grew. The formative experience next was when the administration, of which is kindly represented here today, came and said we were out of here. And that was a catalytic moment in getting us to find a way to stop the train. And I don't remember the student government at the time. I don't remember much about the mechanics. I believe there are some very poorly written notes of mine someplace in the files that you can peruse later. But we communicated that this place is unique. It is special. It was to us then, and again, I'm incredibly proud to have been a part in sustaining this, and amazed with what you all have done since then. And just walking back here today, I'm home. I'm home. So thank you for that opportunity. Proud to be part of this. To get this historical marker created, I know what it's like to try and fight the administration, and I applaud you, because this is another important achievement. So thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you. Before we move to the dedication, I just want to be sure that all alumni know that you are, and everybody else for that matter, you are totally welcome to stay for, I mean, what good is a party without an after party? And you'll be able over there to make gnome hats. Yes. Most of you, I'm guessing, do not have gnome hats, and that could be changed. There is cornhole over there. There are lots of great pictures to look at. And I guess above all, I'd like to say that one of the things I've heard from the students is they would really like to hear your stories of what it was like. The uncensored versions, or the censored versions, whatever you feel comfortable with. So if you've got places to be, then do that. But if you don't, we'd love to have you stay around and enjoy the after party. There will be a band. Hopefully you'll totally get into it. So hope that you can stay. But now let's turn to the main event, if you will. So on behalf of Indiana University, I dedicate this historical marker and commend it as a landmark on the IU Bloomington campus for the inspiration of future members of the academic community. May all who pass by or pause to reflect here note the rich history of Collins as a place that has served many roles for nearly a century and affected many lives. May it serve to encourage wider and deeper engagement with the culture of the human commonwealth through the practice of the principles of self-governance, artistic creativity, and environmental sustainability. Could I ask Tate Holt, Audrey Hood, and Heather Ahmann, the president of the Collins Student Government for this year, to remove the drape and reveal to us all the historical marker.
Okay, yeah, you're tall. You do that.
Are everybody ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
We have a picture of the three of you there together?
Oh, Francis.
Oh, this is great. Where's my gnome hat?